All right, my name is Jana Pastor. I'm the Director for the Division of Health Promotion, and I'm really excited to be moderating this session today with Blue Zones. A couple of housekeeping reminders before we get started is you're going to see yellow pre-tests on your table. Please make sure to complete those, and then the white ones at the end, whether you want CME credit or not for today. That exact thing, yeah. Oh, white, sorry. Yep, white is the pre-test. And then whether you want CMEs or not, if you could please complete that packet for evaluation and turn it in at the end of the day, that really would be very helpful for the rest of us that have been working on that. And if you don't have one of those packets that was in the room for the very first keynote today, Nancy Hofstetter is handing them out. If you can just raise your hand if you still need one. And other than that, I think we'll get started to make sure we have enough time. The disclosures for today's presentation are in your evaluation packet, so you can look there if you want more information about the presentation you're about to hear. But I am super excited. I am going to be moderating today's session with our speaker, Tony Buettner. He's a national speaker and leads business development at Blue Zones. One of Tony's primary tasks is that he's the program manager for the Blue Zone projects. His work encompasses strategic planning, operations, and the facilitation of successful implementation of Blue Zone community projects across the nation. And I'm very excited to announce that as of this Friday, North Dakota will be participating in 4 cities for the very first year. Grand Forks, Fargo, Bismarck, and Mandan will get to participate in a Blue Zone strategic planning and readiness project, and we're thrilled. So if you want more information or you want to be on one of the leadership committees for your city, please see me after this. But I would like to just give it up for Tony Buettner to come and talk to us today.
Good morning. How are we all doing today? I look like I kind of feel that I'm in one of those photo lineups. There's a lot of lights back there. Holy cow. Well, really excited to be here today. Very excited to have the opportunity to bring our international team to the state and work with some communities on a readiness assessment for Blue Zone projects. How many of you had heard about Blue Zone projects prior to this event? Raise your hand. Great. What you see here is a whole National Geographic magazine that was done on our work. It sold in 155 countries and sold out in 4 days. What people don't know is that we've done a lot of research on the happiest populations around the world, looking at those populations, trying to understand why they're so happy, and bringing nuggets back to individuals, families, and communities so they can set up their communities so people live longer, happier lives. I'm going to start with a video today.
What will your last 10 years look like? Will you be quick enough for a game of tag with your grandchild? Strong enough to embrace every moment? Will you grow old with vitality? Or get old with disease? It's time to decide.
What people don't realize is that medical researchers believe that our bodies are set up or designed to live to a healthy age 90, but on average here in the United States, we're living to age 78. We're leaving 12 good years on the table. In Blue Zones areas, places where people live longer lives, on average, they're living 10 years longer than we are with just a fraction of the chronic diseases we face. And our goal at Blue Zones is to help individuals, families, organizations, and even communities take some of those good years back. I want to start sharing with you how this all got started. I'm from the Midwest. I come from a family of 4 boys. My father was an educator. My mother was a stay-at-home mom. And growing up, we actually liked each other. You know, we delivered newspapers together. We were on sports teams together. We went on adventures together. So as we started to graduate from high school and college, my older brother came to us and asked us, before we start our careers, let's go on one last adventure. He suggested that we go on a bicycle ride. So our team put our rear tires in the Antarctic Ocean and bicycled 15,386 miles to the tip of South America. And for all of you that have seen a globe before, if you look at it, it's really not that big a deal. It's all downhill. It was just a real long hill. 2 years later, he suggested that we bicycle from Minneapolis to St. Paul. I told him that I had Saturday morning off to bicycle the 16 miles, but being the mean big brother that he is, he made us bicycle the long way, 13,000 miles around the 45th parallel, and then 2 years later, we bicycled from the northern tip of Africa to the southern tip of Africa. And the reason that I show you these accomplishments aren't to brag, but to articulate what it did to 4 boys from the Midwest. It opened our eyes. It opened our eyes to different foods and different faiths and how friendships were set up and how families and communities came together, and it set us on a path of exploration. But it also caught the eyes of National Geographic. And that organization asked us if we'd be interested in studying the longest lived populations and doing a story on it. For us, the first thing we looked at was something called the Danish Twin Studies that establishes that your longevity is tied to your genes by only 20%. 80% of how long each and every one of us live is tied to our environments and our lifestyles. So our premise was, if we could find the right environments and lifestyles that support longevity, we might have the de facto recipe. Our simple approach were to find demographically confirmed, geographically defined places where people live longer lives. First step for us, obviously, was to find experts, world-renowned experts in anthropology, medical research, nutrition, and actually go and embed ourselves into these places. And over the last 15 years, we've located 5 places around the world that we call blue zones, and it's to these blue zones that we searched for the secret of longevity. We found our first blue zone here on the island of Sardinia. It's here that you find the longest lived men. They live 10 years longer than we do here in America. What we find is a culture living up in the highlands, actually a place called the Noro Province, where you find a collection of 6 villages and about 40,000 people. We thought we would find these longevity hotspots down by the ocean where there was fresh water and seafood, but no. Here we find a Bronze Age culture. We find a culture that is made up of shepherds. So you see men and women out with their flocks for weeks at a time getting low-intensity exercise. Back in the villages, you find very few cars. You see people walking, biking. You see their environment set up that are nudging them into physical movement. When you look at diet, surprisingly, these populations eat primarily plants. About 95% of what they eat is plant-based, whole grain. They do eat animal protein, but on average only about 5 times a month. And portion size is about the size of this clicker. So very interesting when you look at diet. They'll eat a little bit of a goat, they eat a little bit of chicken, but it's primarily pork, and as you can see, when they get their hands on that pork, they get pretty excited too. But what amazed us about this culture is a culture that has been made up of portable diet. Pictured here, what's called pan de musica. This is unleavened bread made out of durum wheat, very durable, so they'll cook it and put it in their backpacks and off they go. A culture that's created their own cheese. Pictured here, made out of sheep's milk is what's called pecorino cheese, very high in omega-3 fatty acids. And everywhere we went, we saw vineyards and people sipping a little bit of red wine. We had this wine tested. It's called Canninau wine, and it turns out to have about 3 times the artery scrubbing compounds than any other wine in the world. And I can tell you from a couple Friday nights, it tastes good too. But really what amazed us about this population is how they set up their culture. As you get older in this population, you are more revered. But you're not only revered, you're tapped into for your wisdom by city leaders, civil patrols. You're expected to participate in your community and with your family. We find these aging populations typically being taken care of by their children, which affords an additional 4 to 6 years of longevity. And we actually found this thing called the grandmother effect. The grandchildren of these extended families suffer lower rates of infant mortality and disease. So everyone benefits from this situation. This is a place where you see 103-year-old men biking to work, chopping wood, and beating a man 65 years younger than them in a arm wrestling tournament. How many of you have an older brother? Raise your hand. I know your pain out there. The best part of my job is I get to do about 90 keynotes around the world every year, showing my older brother, Dan Buettner, founder of Blue Zones, getting whooped by a guy 65 years older than them in an arm wrestling tournament. And the best part of it is, he doesn't know I do it. We found our second Blue Zone here on the archipelago of Okinawa. Okinawa has what every single city in North Dakota wants. They have the longest lived women. They live 12 years longer than we do. And you say to yourself, well, why is that? And how does Okinawa have anything to do with North Dakota? But there's more similarities than differences. These aren't homogeneous populations. These are heterogeneous populations. These are cultural melting pots. But we find here an extraordinary longevity profile that yields the longest disability-free life expectancy in the world. As a population, they live 7 good years longer than we do. There's 5 times as many centenarians, 1/5 the rate of breast and colon cancer, and 1/6 the rate of cardiovascular disease. Just imagine how healthy communities, organizations could be with this type of health. So what do we find here? We find a population, again, that's eating primarily a plant-based diet. We found some fruits and vegetables we knew, and we found some that we had absolutely no clue what they were. Can anyone tell me what that vegetable is? You can find it here in your grocery stores. It's actually called Goya, or bitter melon. This vegetable has been proven to kill some cancer cells, reduce inflammation, and clean your blood. This is a population that eats about 7 times as much tofu as we do here in America, a population that survived decades really on one vegetable, the sweet potato, after World War II. But this is a culture that actually takes time every day to reduce stress. Stress, as the Surgeon General talked about earlier, that causes inflammation, that causes almost every single preventable disease. This population does that by what they call ancestor veneration. They start every one of their days with a cup of tea and simply remembering the generations that have come before them. This is a population that if you were lucky enough to be born into at a very young age, you would have been put into a circle of friends that you travel through life together. Something called the Framingham study, a very famous study here in Massachusetts, the United States, articulated that isolation and loneliness kills. 30 years ago, the average American had 3 best friends that they could count on in a good day and a bad day, and they'd listen. Today, we're down to 1. We're becoming these isolated and lonely communities. In Okinawa, you're put into these circle of friendships. They're called moais. And you're expected to travel through life with these same friends, not meaning you can't have more. These 5 women pictured here have been in this Moai for 97 years. Their average age is 101 years of age. And this social construct, this support system, has had a profound effect on the longevity of this population. That's well documented, but that's not to say they still don't argue about that hot guy they both liked in high school. They do, they bicker a little bit. Most dangerous year of life for Americans is the year that we're born because of infant mortality, but the second most dangerous year is the year that we retire. You have a 30% greater chance of having a heart attack that year. And researchers tell us that it has to do with your sense of purpose, that you go through life and your purpose is getting up in the morning, going to work. And you do that for decades and decades, and then one day that's not there. What's so unique about Okinawa is they don't even have a word in their language for retirement. Instead, when you talk about their longevity, they mention this thing called ikigai. And when you have that translated, it simply means the reason they get up in the morning. And researchers tell us people that have that sense of purpose and live 7 years longer than those that don't. This 104-year-old karate master's ikigai was simply teaching karate. This 97-year-old fisherman, his ikigai was spear fishing for fresh fish every day to give to his extended family. I'd like to remind you, 97 years of age. And this 104-year-old woman's ikigai was simply her family, pictured here with her great-great-great-granddaughter. 2 women separated by 103 years of age. When we asked her how it felt to hold this 4th generation, she put her head back and said, like leaping into heaven. We found America's Blue Zone in California at a place called Loma Linda, about 60 miles from LAX. You actually take the Loma Linda exit off the San Bernardino Freeway. At the top, you find a Del Taco, and on the left-hand side, you find a Wiener Hut. You've arrived at America's longevity hotspot. No, I mean it. This is a city, 28,000 people, an American city. They have fast food restaurants, they have stress. They work hard too, they struggle. But this population is living 10 years longer than the rest of us. So what the heck is going on? People have asked me, what's in the water out there? And it's not the water, it's the high concentration of Seventh-day Adventists there. And something called the Adventist Health Study has been tracking this population for almost 4 decades, and it's considered a gold standard epidemiology study. And from it, we were able to get some extraordinary data. Here in America, women on average live to about age 80. Amongst the Adventists, they're living 9 years more. Men, on average, here in America, we live to about age 76. But amongst the Adventists, they're eking out 11 years. Think about that. So when we look at this population, we're thinking, well, what are they doing differently? This is, again, similar to your communities in North Dakota. These aren't homogeneous populations. These are heterogeneous melting pot populations. But this is a whole population implementing strategies to live longer lives. They take their diet right from the Bible. Genesis chapter 1, verses 29 to 31, where it talks about fruits, nuts, greens, and legumes. This is a population, a whole population that does what is called a 24-hour sanctuary of time. From sunset on Friday to sunset on Saturday, they stop everything. They focus on 3 things: faith, family, and friends. Think about that. Downshifting, focusing. They take nature walks, so we see this low intensity exercise again. And obviously over the years, the definition to have nature walks has changed a little bit, but the bottom line is they get together. And during this sanctuary of time, they're exchanging healthy recipes. They're teaching their kids how to cook healthy foods. They're supporting their aging parents. And research over the last 4 decades has clearly shown the connection between this social network construct and the extraordinary longevity. This is a place where you find a 106-year-old active cowboy, Mr. Ed Rollins. He starts his day with a swim, and on the weekends he still puts on the water skis. This is a place where you find this guy, multi-millionaire, 97-year-old Mr. Ellsworth Wareham. When he was quoted $6,000 for a privacy fence, he said, for that price, just build it myself. So for 4 days, we watched him dig footings, mix concrete, put up stringers, and build this privacy fence. And as you can imagine, on the 4th day, he ended up in the emergency room. But what's so interesting about this photograph is that this is an Ellsworth Wareham. This is Ellsworth Wareham. At age 97, he was still assisting with 20 open heart surgeries a month. And our favorite centenarian, Miss Marge Taton, at 104 years old, Marge would start her day with what she called a prune juice shooter. I didn't see any of those on your buffet table. Maybe next time you want to try that. At 104 years old, she'd start her day pumping iron. She'd go downstairs and get on the stationary bike and do about 3 miles a day. And then she'd get behind her 1987 root beer colored Cadillac and wail down the San Bernardino Freeway, where she still volunteered for 4 organizations, one of them being an old folks home. So she's 104, and I asked her, Marge, why are you working so hard? She goes, somebody's got to take care of them old folks. She's 104, taking care of a 87-year-old woman. We found our 4th blue zone on the Nicoya Peninsula of Costa Rica. It's here that the whole population has a 3 times better chance of living to a healthy age 90. And what we start to find are commonalities. People moving, connecting, eating wisely, downshifting. This is a population that's eaten pretty much the same diet for tens of thousands of years based on corn and beans, squash. But this is a population that doesn't spend trillions of dollars on the military. They spend their money on preventative health and delivering good health, not good health care. So about 3 times a year, you will get a visit from a healthcare expert to come to your house, understand your health, teach you, sit with you, take care of your aging parents. And it's this preventative strategy that is providing extraordinary longevity. You see 105-year-old guys playing with slingshots. And one of my favorites here, Panchita, when I met her at 107 years old, she was cutting her grass with her machete. That'd be nice to see your mom and dad doing that at 107. We found our last blue zone here on the island of Icaria, Greece, right off the coast of Turkey. It's here the whole population lives about 8 years longer than us, with almost no chronic disease and no dementia. So what's happening here? We find an idyllic place, a place where people are kind of sarcastic. You actually think they're being mean, but they're actually just checking you to see how thick your skin is before they accept you into your community. It's a place that we find a diet, again, mostly plants. You find a population that's very active. Faith is important. Naps are important. Family is very important. But the sense of community is very strong here. This is a place that at about 2 or 3 in the morning, you can look to your left and see a 87-year-old man dancing, and to your right, a 83-year-old man. It's a place of extraordinary longevity, and people there have a sense of community. Everyone is invited to all weddings. But here we found over 150 herbs and spices that grow on this island, and they use them for everything. They cook with them. They infuse teas with them. They actually raise very, very famous honey there around these different herbs. And early research is looking at the connection between these herbs and this longevity. It's here where we found this guy for the first time, a 103-year-old Stomites Mariaides. We sat down with him. He told us a fascinating story about being injured in World War II, having a mangled arm. He told us he was unable to get health care and get his arm fixed so he actually stowawayed on what was called the QE2, a cruise ship that was bringing soldiers back from the United States. He ended up just north of New York. He applied for citizenship. He got his arm fixed. He went on to be a painter. He met a woman. They got married. They bought a house. They had 3 kids. He was living the American dream. Until about age 65, he told us, he said, I woke up, I just wasn't feeling good, and I couldn't breathe. My lungs hurt. He said, I went to the doctor. The doctor did a bunch of tests. He said the doctor came back and told him he had terminal lung cancer. He had about 4 to 6 months to live. I said, well, what did you do? He goes, nothing. I didn't believe him. I went and saw some more doctors. So he went to 4 other doctors and unfortunately got the same diagnosis, 6 months to live, 4th stage lung cancer. I asked him, what'd you do? He said, well, if I was going to die, he said, I didn't want to spend all the money on medical. I wanted to save that for my beautiful wife. So he said, I actually sold everything and I moved back to Korea. I figured if I'm going to die, I want to be buried with my ancestors. So the first couple months he's in bed. Old childhood friends come to see him. After about 2 months, he says, I'm getting out of this bed. I can't stand it anymore. He says, I'm going to plant a garden. He said, I won't be able to harvest it, but my wife and family will. 6 months came and went, and he didn't die. He actually harvested the garden and went right on with his life. This story has been captured in a New York Times article called The Island That Forgot to Die. But I also think it's a metaphor. Of the 263 centenarians we met, not one of them, when we sat down and talked to them, told us a story about them waking up every day wanting to live to age 100. They lived in environments and had lifestyles that subtly but relentlessly nudged them into healthier behaviors. In other words, longevity wasn't pursued, longevity ensued. We came back from that trip, wrote that article for National Geographic. To date, the second most read edition in their 130-year history. People want to know, how do I live a long and happy life? We've gone on to do 4 covers of National Geographic and 4 New York Times best-selling books. We found 9 commonalities, and our work is built upon these commonalities in the longest-lived populations. These people moved. They didn't belong to gyms. They didn't run marathons. They lived in environments and had lifestyles that nudged them into physical behavior. They had the right outlook. They had time-honored traditions to downshift and reduce stress. Simple things like having dinner with their family, planting a garden, doing yoga, meditating, or like the Sardinians did, they just simply went to happy hour, but they had a sense of family and connecting and downshifting. They had a sense of purpose, and they lived it. We know from researchers that people that wake up with a mission statement and live that sense of purpose live 7 years longer than those that don't. These populations ate wisely. There was a strong connection to a healthy meal with friends, family, and community, maybe a little half a glass of red wine. They ate mostly plants. What we've learned is the 5 places where people live the longest lives, the cornerstone of all those diets are beans. They're good for you. They're filling. They taste good. They're easy to make. These populations had strategies not to overeat. They put their family first. Faith was important, and people you hang out were important. So we wanted to understand, what are we supposed to eat? We did a 3-year research study and learned that Americans, on average, every given year, eat 208 pounds of meat, 600 pounds of dairy, 91 pounds of sugar, 46 pieces of pizza, 66 pounds of chips, and we guzzle it down with 58 gallons of soda pop, and we wonder why we are obese or overweight. We wanted to understand, what should we eat? And when you start to look at all these diets and nutritional, you figure out really quick it's all a bunch of confusion. So what we simply did was look at over 150 dietary studies over the last century of the longest lived people on Earth, distilled it down for each, brought it together to create a Blue Zones guidelines. And what they eat is plants. They eat animal protein, but they eat primarily plants. You put it up against Americans eat, and you can see what we should be doing to eat healthy. So in America, we spend about $110 billion on 3 strategies to get people healthy: gyms, diets, supplements. These are good ideas, but they're short-term wins and long-term failures. I'll show you why. If 100 of us went on a diet today, we'd lose 10% of you in about 3 months. We'd lose 90% of you in 7 months. And after 2 years, 3 people on that diet. There's not a diet in the history of men that's helped more than 3% of the population. Gym memberships. People start the year off and their recidivism curve is enormous. And if Blue Zone could bring a pill back where people could take a pill and live longer, you wouldn't be able to get people to take it long enough. So with that information, we were asked to create a model of what we've learned on the longest lived populations to implement a strategy in a community. And we know that people spend about 90% of their time in a 5-mile life radius of where they live, work, and play. So our strategy was to get lots of people excited and participating, to pledge to change their health behavior. Could we put together moais based on Okinawa where people would support each other in changing their health behavior? Could we put on purpose workshops to get people to volunteer and find purpose? And we thought about all those places that you spend your day, the grocery stores, restaurants, schools, faith-based communities, and your employers. Could we create a perfect storm of health and well-being there? And then we looked at policy. Could we help communities to offer healthy and inexpensive good food and make it a little harder to find junk food and stuff that's not good for you, and help people not smoke? And how about the built environment to make it easier for people to walk and bike and connect and congregate and build a sense of community? And what we simply looked at was, could we do this within a community here in America and create a Blue Zone? Back in 2008, AARP funded a 13-month pilot. We chose a small rural community called Albert Lea in southern Minnesota with about 18,000 people. We came in and we spent about 6 months doing nothing but listening, understanding what was working, what were challenges and barriers, low-hanging fruit, and creating an action plan that was directed by the community. When we started in Albert Lea, Minnesota, it looked like the city was deserted. They had a $40 million grant project. They were going to widen their main streets and increase the speed limit and just move people right downtown. We suggested narrowing the street, lowering the speed limit, putting in diagonal parking, wider sidewalks so people could congregate and create a place for people, a place for industry, a place that's walkable and bikeable. With the money that they saved on this innovation, they put their eye to their focal point of their community, Fountain Lake. And the problem there is, to get to Fountain Lake, if you got there safe without getting run over, there was nothing to do. So with the money they saved, they put in 9 miles of walkway around their lake. Now on any given day, you have people walking, biking, connecting, no gyms, no diets, no supplements. We heard that kids didn't know where fresh fruits came from, so they put in community gardens. Hundreds of people bought them out in one day. People now were eating fresh vegetables, teaching kids how to eat, moving naturally. We worked with the 78 restaurants, but we brought in experts to offer strategies where healthy choices could be easy in the restaurants. We went to, this is one thing I always, have you ever noticed when you go to a restaurant, you order a sandwich, it comes with a compost pile of French fries? Does it have to be that way, or could the default be fruits and vegetables? Just little small nudges. We worked with grocery stores on healthy food demonstrations and and shelf talkers on healthy foods and healthy checkout lanes. We worked with schools to implement policies simply to get kids moving more, eating better, finding mindfulness and purpose. We put on purpose workshops in faith-based communities. We had 1,100 people show up. We put on walking moais. We had 1,600 people in a population of 18,000 commit to walk for 10 weeks. They walked 56,000 steps and lost 17,000 pounds. 2 years later, the original moais, these people, 60% of them were still together. So talk about knocking down the barriers of isolation and loneliness. We worked with employers that had work-site wellness programs, but focused to permanent and semi-permanent changes to environment. We had 24% of the population raise their hand and say they would do one simple thing. The eyes of the world were on us. Good Morning America, the Today Show, USA Today. When the results came in, they were stunning. City workers' health care claims down. Tobacco usage in the county down. People walking more, biking more, add-on grants. But what we did there 10 years ago that lives today was train 250 volunteers to implement a systems approach to population health, and they're now known around the world as an innovator in population health. 2 years later, Harvard came into Albert Lea, Minnesota, and called the results stunning because it was permanent and semi-permanent change that goes to today. We started with Albert Lea, Minnesota. We partnered to expand. We wanted to see if this would work at a city of 100,000. We hired 20 full-time employees from these communities, 500 volunteers, and trained them. The first 3 years, they called it the Blue Zone Miracle. The 5th year, they reached a 50% drop in childhood obesity from their Blue Zone project work. The previous Surgeon General didn't believe the results. He came and brought his team, spent a week, and this is what he had to say. That caught the eye of the governor of Iowa. He asked if we could Blue Zone the pork state. We actually hired 50 full-time employees from these communities, trained and certified them, created a Blue Zone Institute. Our largest city right now is in Fort Worth, Texas, 40 full-time employees, 4,000 volunteers, over 800,000 people here. Our current Surgeon General has spent a few days studying the work down here. We have another statewide initiative happening in Hawaii, and the bottom line here is 10 years ago, people told us we were wasting our time, that you can't get a population healthier. And what I tell people now is not only does it work, it can work, and it's working now in 2 countries, in 14 states and 51 communities around the country. I want to end by simply sharing with you a couple of the nuggets that we've learned over this journey of what you can do in your community. You hear Dr. Adams talking about this a lot. This work can't be done in siloed. You need to bring together people, places, policy. You need to have everyone at the table and focus on policy change that affects the whole community. And in most cases, disproportionately, those ones that need it more when you're looking at built environment. Think about permanent changes that once it's implemented, it just simply nudges people into healthier behaviors, and it doesn't need to be redone. It's done, and you move on. Measure. Use good data. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. Drive accountability. If someone's got their target on their forehead, drive that accountability with those metrics to make sure the work gets done. Engage experts. This is hard work. Look out in the community, in the country, and work with people that bring credibility and that it can assist you. But at the end of the day, this has to be about you and the community, so follow the voice of your community, because they'll stand behind you and get this done. And of course, have fun and celebrate. So I'm going to leave you just with one more thought here. You remember this guy here I told you about, Stamites? Isn't he a great-looking guy? Yeah, you see, he thinks so too. So you remember I told you about that garden that he planted. Actually, that's it behind him. Those are olive trees, but at 103 years old, you're still making about 200 liters of wine. And Dan was doing that article for the New York Times, and he asked me if I'd do part of the interview. So it was a late night call, about 2 in the morning, and I called this number with 17 numbers in it, and it was this weird dial tone, and I hear the phone pick up, and I'm so excited to do this interview. And I go, "Hi, good afternoon, this is Tony Buettner." And here's what I heard. "Yeah, what do you want?" He said, "We're a little busy around here, we're making wine today." And I said, "Well, it's Tony, I just want to ask you a few questions for the article." He said, "Okay, go ahead, but hurry up." And I asked him the one question I really wanted to know. I asked him, "Why do you think you were cured of 4th stage lung cancer?" And it was quiet for about 3 or 4 seconds. And all of a sudden he said, "I don't know." He said, "It just happened." But he said, "You know what, Tony, about 20 years ago when I was 85, I was back in the States, and I wanted to go see them 5 doctors and see what they thought." And I said, "Well, what'd they say?" He goes, "Nothing." He said they were all dead. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you. Thank you very much. Do we have time for 1 or 2 questions?
Yeah, well, they can come and see you if they have questions.
Great.
Just come up and ask them up here.
Sounds good. Great.
Is this on? Okay. Thank you guys so much. If you have questions, come up here and talk. There's a break going on right now, so we have a chance to connect with Tony, but please make sure you complete your post tests and you can leave them on the table and I'll collect them, and make sure you take your evaluation packets with you. But thank you so much, Tony.
Thank you.